Let me do a mic check thing. Can everybody hear me? Okay.
See.
Yeah. Well, welcome. Greetings to this forum, conversation, celebration of education and capitalism, struggles for learning and liberation. Thanks especially for coming on a Friday afternoon. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where the Rethinking Schools offices are, the Educators Network for Social Justice has, we call them Fight Back Fridays. And, but for years they've told me that in Milwaukee you cannot have a meeting on a Friday afternoon unless you promise beer. And so they have the Fight Back Fridays at a tavern. It's a collectively owned tavern in River West, if you know Milwaukee. And a lot of fight back, a lot of beer drinking. So I don't think we promised you beer today, so good for you for coming. Did Adam did you promise? No, Adam did not promise beer.
We do have sodas in the refrigerator, but we don't have any beer. But help yourself to some soda.
Clearly not from Milwaukee, this man. So I'm Bill Bigelow. I'm the curriculum editor of Rethinking Schools magazine. I hope all of you subscribe to Rethinking Schools, or will subscribe. We've got a display in back. Rethinking Schools, we like to think of Rethinking Schools as being the preeminent social justice publication, education publication in the country. It's been around for over 25 years. And my work was as a high school teacher here in Portland. I taught for about 30 years at Grant High School, at Jefferson High School, and then finally at Franklin High School. And I have the easy job today. I get to introduce our speakers. Let's see. First, some thank yous. Gwen Sullivan, are you here? Well, we can thank her in absentia. Thanks to the Portland Association of Teachers for inviting us into the union space here, allowing us to occupy the union this afternoon, as it were. And especially to Gwen Sullivan, the PAT president. Also, I'm going to be introducing Adam Sanchez, but I want to just kind of recognize and thank Adam for the week that he's had. Yesterday, he was one of the main organizers of the demonstration against Stand for Children. What my friend at Rethinking Schools, Stan Karp, calls Stomp on Children. He was the main organizer of the event today. And on top of that, he teaches 6 classes at Jefferson High School at the very toughest time of the year. So he had quite a week. So thank Adam Sanchez. So let's see. So, oh, and of course, the most important announcement, the bathrooms, for those of you who didn't find it, are in the back. So here's our lesson plan. Sarah and Jesse and Adam are going to give brief-ish talks. And then we're going to have an opportunity to kind of break down a little bit and talk amongst ourselves about the ideas that they have raised. And then we're going to pull back into the large group where we will have kind of a discussion slash Q&A session. And then finally at 6 o'clock sharp, we're going to try and break and have an opportunity for you to buy lots and lots of copies of Education and Capitalism, Struggles for Learning and Liberation. Did I mention that before? And get signatures from the writers and turn these into collector's items and all that. You know, just sort of I just have 3 things I'd like to say with your permission before we begin with the speakers. You know, I think it's great that we're doing this amongst ourselves today, that we're talking about the relationship between education and capitalism. I think we also have to figure out ways of doing this with our students, too. That one of the things that the curriculum teaches very well is what not to think about and what not to critique, and capitalism is right up at the top of that. It appears as natural and normal and just the way things are, that there's no alternatives. In fact, the Oregon State Social Studies Standards does not mention the word capitalism, not even for economics. They talk about the economy and the global economy as if capitalism is the only way of organizing things. And right down below capitalism is schooling. There's no place in the curriculum where kids are encouraged to think critically about their school. And so we need to figure out ways not just to have these kind of conversations for ourselves, but to have these kind of conversations with our students as well. And so I think that, you know, it's an invitation to those of you who are educators, but also all those of you who are concerned about what's going on, and obviously everyone, to join that conversation. The other thing is, I want to share a passage with you. Any of you recognize this book?
I use that book.
Yeah. You use this book?
Well, not very often.
In Portland, this is the adoption. Let me just back up. There's only one class that students have to take in the state of Oregon, high school students have to take on the world. And it used to be called Global Studies. Now they call it, oh my goodness, they call it Modern World History, named after the textbook. And so throughout their entire career in Portland, every single student, every single high school student will be assigned this book. One year at Franklin, I tried to not assign it, but in fact, you have to assign it. There are 2 pages in this book on the war in Iraq. 2 pages. There's not a single mention in these 2 pages that there was any anti-war movement around the world whatsoever. Some countries opposed the war, but no movement, actually. There's one, what they call a critical writing assignment. Here it is. Imagine you are a speechwriter for President Bush. Write the introductory paragraph of a speech to coalition forces after their victory in Iraq. Now, how did this happen? Now, no, seriously, how did this happen? I think what it, at least what for me what it speaks to is that we were sort of asleep at the wheel. That that progressive educators and the broader progressive community are not having a conversation about what kids are learning in school. And particularly the way in which huge corporations, because this is one of the 3 biggies, in which huge corporations are influencing and shaping the curriculum that kids are getting. And so it's, again, it's an invitation to us to figure out how to continue what we're doing here today, how to take it into beyond this, to really examining the curriculum that is being taught in the school, the official curriculum at least, and having something to say about it. The third thing I'd like to say is really an invitation. The Northwest Teaching for Social Justice Conference, a number of you have come to. This is a 5th annual conference. It's sponsored by the Portland Area Rethinking Schools Magazine, Puget Sound Rethinking Schools, and Olympia Social Educators for Social Justice. It's going to be October 20th. We're back here in Portland this year. It's going to be at Madison High School. And it's still not too late to propose workshops for that. I mean, this is a place where we can build community, where we can imagine the kind of schooling that we want for kids, and also how to fight to make that happen. And so please come to that at Madison High School. The website is nwtsj.org, nwtsj.org, and which also has opportunities for you to propose workshops, which are open until July 1st. Okay, introductions. Sarah Cano. Sarah, most importantly, Sarah is a public high school teacher. And she's active in United Teachers of Los Angeles, UTLA, the union in LA. She is one of the editors of Education and Capitalism. I met Sarah a few years ago and was so really impressed with her and invited her immediately to write for Rethinking Schools, which she graciously did. She's also written for a lot for International Socialist Review and wait, there's another one. Counterpunch. So Sarah is going to be our kickoff speaker. Jesse Hagopian, you know, actually, you probably first heard Jesse Hagopian when I heard Jesse Hagopian, because he was in Haiti during the earthquake. And so he gave incredibly passionate and moving eyewitness accounts on Democracy Now!, describing what he was seeing in Haiti. And he's still active in Haiti solidarity work. Jesse, he also is a high school teacher, teaches at Garfield High School in Seattle. He also, I want to make sure I get this right, he's writing for that radical newspaper, the Seattle Times, and along with Common Dreams, Black Agenda Report, Truth Out, theprogressive.org, Counterpunch. Jesse's also given some of the most well-received and lively workshops at the Northwest Teaching for Social Justice Conference. Yet another plug for the conference. And Jesse will be back again doing a workshop, possibly with Adam Sanchez, at the conference this year. And finally, Adam Sanchez. Adam, as I mentioned, is a full-time teacher at Jefferson High School. And what else to say about Adam? He writes regularly for Rethinking Schools. In fact, Adam assured me that after the meeting tonight, he's going home and is writing a new article for Rethinking Schools. Didn't you assure me
No
of that?
beer for Adam.
Or not. He's also written a lot for socialistworker.org and has had articles in International Socialist Review. He is a tireless organizer and just absolutely a great human being and somebody who I have tremendous admiration for, although I don't think he sleeps. Anyway, with no further ado, Sarah Cano.
Thanks, Bill. And our book sort of starts off with a thank you to Bill and to Rethinking Schools for all the work that they've done over the years to sort of break down that division between teachers and intellectuals. There shouldn't really be any division between the practitioners and the thinkers and the creators and the people who make policies. So big thanks to Rethinking Schools and to Bill. And greetings from the only state, one of the only states in the country that has worse class sizes than you guys do. I was thinking that I teach 10th grade world history. There's not quite, maybe about the same or not quite as many people in this room as I have in a typical 10th grade classroom trying to teach world history 4 times a day. So, if you can imagine, I know that yours are, I don't know what your typical class size is, but I think all my world history classes have about 40 students in them, so that's in Los Angeles. We are really going through it now in Los Angeles in ways I've been following through a lot of the stuff that Adam has written. I've been following the teacher strikes here, or the teacher strikes and non-strikes here in Oregon. How many people in the room are teachers? Cool. Anyone, a teacher who's been on strike recently? Cool, awesome. Thank you so much You have no idea how much easier it makes us, our case in Los Angeles when we're saying, hey, we have to stand up and do something about this, and if we do, maybe we can win something like the Reynolds teacher did. I mean, the idea in California and in Los Angeles right now that you could actually get a cost of living increase is like, that's so far beyond what people would ever hope for, but it's because we haven't really done what you guys have done. We had by far, in the teachers union in Los Angeles, by far our most wildly popular thing that we did for the last number of years was a 1-hour illegal strike that we did in 2008. We had 20,000 parents join us on the picket lines, and we went into work an hour late. It was wildly popular, so we were supposed to follow it up with a 1-day illegal strike in 2009, and it got called off by our union leadership at the last moment, and I think our union really hasn't recovered from that since. I'd love to trade war stories with some of the folks here who are in the teachers union. Now 2 of our schools are facing reconstitution, as people have experienced and been through here. So, but I did want to say thank you for standing up, because it makes it way easier when folks like myself say, if we just keep taking it.
I know what's going on. Slumped over. Thank you. I did feel, I occasionally have a fainting, semi-fainting.
You want a glass of water?
Subsides really easily. And I think I'll also get frustrated. It's not alarming. It's something that often happens in the hot weather. It's nothing. Thank you. Actually.
We're glad you're all right.
Thank you. They should have a little tag that says this.
Thank you. I did talk about the book in Austin, Texas, at a Save Our Schools rally in Austin, Texas, and we had a meeting right afterward. There was like 100 people there, and packed with teachers, and it was really great. And what people were there to talk about is Texas being a right-to-work state. It was just this whole, and so people had all these questions about like, how do you organize a teachers union? And it was just not something I was really prepared to deal with because I've never even, you know, at least we have unions in Oregon and in California, and so, you know, dealing with that sort of thing was, I had to go home and do a lot of reading after that because those were not questions that I was prepared for. So I think the essential point, the thesis of the book is really summed up best by a quote by a guy named Raul Ferrer, who was the architect of the Cuban literacy campaign after their revolution in Cuba. And this is his quote. He said, "Ever since the student upheavals in Paris during May of '68, hundreds of people have been traveling the world in an attempt to isolate the crisis of our pupils from the moral struggles of our times. It's a gross diversion. We deny that there's a crisis in the schools. It's not a crisis in the classroom, it's a crisis of the social order." And I think that that's really kind of sums up what we're dealing with right now. 1 in 4 adults in the U.S. right now is working in a poverty zone job. So poverty zone is minimum wage plus, you know, up to 125% of minimum wage. That's 1 in 4 adults. Out of all the jobs that are opening up right now, 7 out of the 10 jobs that have the most openings are in fields that require less than a bachelor's degree. There's a 25% unemployment rate for blacks and Latinos in this country. And in the year 2011, there were 4.4 job seekers for every job in the U.S. And so this really hits home to high school teachers, because I know all of us have stood up there at a certain point and told kids, you know, you have to get an education. It's your route to financial stability. It's your ticket, and you know, we really have to examine that and examine what we're telling students, because when they're graduating into this kind of a you know, into this kind of an economic climate, we can't simply say that education is the key to financial stability when that's not the kind of economy that that we have going on. There was like 13 people, I think 12 out of the 13 are public school teachers that all collaborated to write this book. And why we wrote it is that we were really trying to make the case to people that what we need is, if you are the best hearted people have gotten into public education, and they've done, you know, most teachers get into public education because they're committed to equality, they're committed to social justice, they're committed to enlightenment, that process that happens when you see the light bulb go on, when reading and investigation and learning actually means something. And this is why people have gotten into education. But if you want to engage in that kind of in that kind of learning, we need you to join us in the struggles for social justice and social equality that are going to happen in our streets and in our communities, and you know, struggles against capitalism. That, you know, what we do in our classrooms is incredibly important, but it's only really step one in the fight for social justice. Another thing, in addition to just the economic climate that we have going on right now, another thing that folks discover is that when you graduate, folks discover that economically speaking, we live in a dictatorship, not in a democracy. And so there's this contradiction between the ideology of schools, which is equal opportunities, equal access, one person, one vote, the kind of civics lessons that we teach our students, the kind of political democracy we have in the very narrow political realm. And then you graduate into the workplace and you realize that, you know, we live in an economic hierarchy and an economic dictatorship where there's private ownership and private decision making about the resources that you know, exist in our society. And so I believe that contradiction between the ideology of equal access and democracy that comes in our schools And then the hierarchy and the dictatorship that people see in the economy is one of the things that fuels fuels movements for social justice, especially in schools. Sorry, I'm like, is everything okay?
Is there like a nurse or anyone in here? She said that she's so-so. If there's anyone that has any basic first aid training, maybe we
I do.
can check out quickly. And is there a bathroom in here?
Yeah,
it's if you go back there to the left.
Should we go on with this?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, that's kind of scary. So the contradiction between what we're promised in schools and what we actually get, I think, is the reason why the demands for access to quality public education have been at the heart of almost every social movement of the 20th and 21st century. So whether you're talking about the civil rights movement, the current Occupy movement that's going on, the Chicano movement of the 1960s and 1970s, most of the revolutions that happened in the 20th century, access to quality public free education has been at the heart of almost all those movements. And I believe that it's because of the ideology that this is a right that we're all entitled to, and it's because of the ideology of equality and equal access. So, and that is one of the major reasons that even though I'm about to describe a couple of the features of public education under capitalism and what makes it repressive at the same time that it can be liberating, that it's a demand worth fighting for because it's a positive social right that all of us deserve. This is what we should be. Brown University did a study that shows that between $3.4 to $4 trillion has been spent on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And if you think about how many positive social rights do we have left in this country that people think that they're entitled to, I mean, it really is only education. There's no more public health care. There's very little public recreation or public space, and there's very little social safety net left. Public education is one of the last positive social rights that people have, that people feel entitled to. That this is something that the government should provide for you. So for those reasons, it's worth fighting for, but it's worth saying also that in a capitalist society, there are certain features. I want to just feature three of the things that education looks like under capitalism. The first one is that education in a racist society, education is going to be incredibly racist. So I don't know how many people have read the Michelle Alexander book, The New Jim Crow. In it, she argues that it's not just a mistake that we have so many black men in particular in prison in this country, and that we have 25% of the world's prisoners. Right here in the United States, 5% of the population, 5% of the world's population, 25% of its prisoners. That's not a mistake. It's a means of social control. And what happens inside our school, the criminalization of our youth goes hand in hand with that. So that by the time that they're in middle schools, 28% of black males will be suspended from school by the time they're in middle school. 28%, one in four, or even higher. The statistic for white male students is 10%. UCLA did a great study about it, and they tried to say, they tried to answer this racist sort of thing about how, oh, well, those kids get in trouble more often, they're worse behaved than the other kids. And so they said, no, we're only going to study what happens to kids once they already get caught doing something. So they looked at public displays of affection. And black kids were 3 times more likely to get suspended for public displays of affection than white kids, once they already got caught, right? So it controlled for that factor. Maybe they just do it more often. It was an excellent study. 73% of black children today attend a segregated school. That's only just a tiny bit better than it was before the civil rights movement ever happened. So the point is that in a racist society, schools are going to reinforce some of those racist norms. The second feature is that there's a mythology about our schools that they're supposed to be a social leveler. They're supposed to level the playing field and give everyone an equal opportunity. But much more often than that, they actually act as a sorting ground, as a way of slotting people into the hierarchies that they're supposed to be in once they graduate. So there's a guy named John Marsh who wrote a book. What's John Marsh's book? Titled the new one from Monthly Review. Okay, so don't forget I had to. I'm just going to finish up on that. he wrote a book, and it's cited in my chapter, and what he argues is that really education, the best analogy for it is like a crowded theater. So that of the students, of the people, 6% of people in this country who are born in the bottom quintile, so 6% of the poorest people born in this country can rise up to the top 20%. 6%, that's our, social mobility. And there's more, and then it's a little bit better if you want to just talk about getting into the top half. We have very, very, very modest social mobility compared to other countries. For those 6%, yes, education is the primary means through which those people, rise up the social ladder. And so if you're a parent, you have to hope that your kid is is in that 6%. And so it does work for a tiny, tiny minority. But what works for a tiny minority cannot, by definition, work for a majority, because this is where John Marsh's analogy comes in. He said it's like a crowded theater, because in a crowded theater, if you can't see and you stand up, okay, it'll work for you, it'll work for one person or two people, you can see the screen, but it can't work for the majority, because if everyone stood up, we still couldn't see the screen. And so people who want to pretend that education should be the solution to poverty for our society as a whole, or even for a majority, this is just a myth and a lie, because, again, you have to look at what's happening with the economy that we're graduating students into. And the very last thing I want to say about education under capitalism is that I actually think it does more to condition behavior than it does to teach. Like, a lot of people think, well, our education system is set up to teach people like low-wage skills for low-wage jobs. It actually does very little of this. I teach, again, I have 40 students per period. I would say that using Microsoft Word and using the internet is a pretty entry-level job skill these days, right? So if I have 2 computers to teach 40 students how to use, Microsoft Word, we're not even giving them those basic skills. I think we're actually doing more to condition the kind of behavior that the capitalist economy is demanding of them. So there are certain personality traits cited in a study in the book Schooling in Capitalist America by Herbert Bowles and Robert Gintis. And they said that, okay, here are the personality traits that correlate positively with GPA. Character, work ethic, dependability, perseverance, consistency, willingness to follow orders, punctuality, and the ability to delay gratification. So if you have those personality traits, you are going to tend to have a good GPA. If you have these personality traits, it correlates negatively with GPA. I wonder how many people in this room have been affected by this. Correlate negatively, creativity, aggressiveness, and independence. Those are personality traits that correlate negatively with GPA in this country. So, so I'm laying out a sort of negative picture of what education looks like, but again, remember, there's this huge contradiction between what we are promised in education and what it actually looks like, and I think this is the fuel for the social movements that demand access to real quality public education. I think that what a lot of us envision with education when we get into the field, we think about reading, teaching, learning, debating, investigating. And I think that these things really come alive in a way that we can't even really imagine today. Imagine if we were all able to, if we were going to investigate a problem, debate it, and then we were able to take a democratic vote about something in our community to actually change the way that it works. I think that will change intellectual engagement in a way that most of us can't even imagine today. So that what the book argues also is that movements and revolutions are some of the best schools, because what they do is they take your ideas and they make them matter. And when your ideas matter because you're going to use them to change the world, it engages people in learning in a way that's hard for us even to imagine in the absence of a social movement. So one suggestion I have for when we break out into discussion groups is that Paulo Freire said that education should be about fulfilling our ontological vocation of humanization. So Paulo Freire says education is about the process of making us more fully human. And so one question I'd like to put out there for discussion in the small groups is, what would you actually need in your life to make you more fully human? And how could education sort of, serve that need? So I wanted to sort of end with that question.
All right, thank you. And it's been such a
pleasure to get to work on this book. So I want to thank Sarah for including me on it, and Bill for all the support and making my daily life a lot better at Garfield High School, because I have awesome lesson plans that excite the kids that I get from Bill. And I want to actually start by saying, telling you about the best day I've ever had at school, because I think there's some lessons for us about the way forward in this struggle. And to start with to get to the story about the best day I've ever had at school, we got to start with a little backstory, which is that in Washington State, where I teach, it says in the state constitution that education is the paramount duty of the state. So it says the highest law of our land in Washington State, that before they fund anything else or before they take care of any other problem, they have to fund education. And then there's been numerous lawsuits over the years that have defined what that means. And so over half of the budget is mandated to be used on education. Of course, they haven't followed that in decades in Washington State, but according to the Constitution and many lawsuits, that is their responsibility. So when Christine Gregoire announced that she was calling a special legislative session to cut the budget of healthcare and education by $2 billion, we thought that was an illegal act, and we decided as members of the Social Equality Educators that we would go and stage a citizen's arrest at the legislature. So my man Dan helped me make a big banner that said lawbreakers need to fully fund education, and we unfurled the banner from the balcony during after they rang the gavel, and the troopers came and pulled us out and disrupted it, but they didn't arrest us, which they probably wish they would have, because we found out the House Ways and Means Committee was meeting across the way, which was actually the committee that does the cutting. So we got in there early, and they quickly locked the doors because the Occupy movement was there outside the doors, and there were hundreds of unionists from all over the state who were protesting these budget cuts. But about half a dozen or so of us teachers got into the room before they locked the door, and as soon as they started the meeting, we mic checked the room and informed them that we were in a crime scene and that they were about to break the highest law of our state. And I pulled out some plastic pair of handcuffs I had on me. We had citizens arrest warrants we passed out to the legislators. The police officer didn't agree with my interpretation of the law and arrested me instead, as much as I tried to convince them they were the lawbreakers. And so I went to jail for an evening, a day and an evening, met some interesting guys who thought I should get a teaching award for the action. But I was actually really nervous because I thought, now I got this huge, I'm going to have all these court fees. Are the parents going to freak out that their kids in a classroom with a criminal and try to pull their kids out of my class? What's going to happen? So I go to school the next morning, they let me out, and I'm really nervous, and I'm coming into Garfield High School, and someone yells, "Free Mr. Hagopian!" I'm like, oh no, they know. And so everyone's coming up to my classroom, though. One of my students from last year comes up and he says, "We started a Free Mr. Hagopian Facebook page, and we have 200 people on it already. But now that you're out, we're going to change it to walk out against the budget cuts." So the next day, in 24 hours, they organized a mass walkout at Garfield High School. There was over 500 students. And it wasn't just a skip school activity. They had a pamphlet that they printed out with what the budget cuts have meant to Garfield High School. So seniors don't have 4 years of language anymore or science. They have to take those classes at a community college that they have to pay for. So guess who doesn't get to have college-ready classes, right? Again, students of color and low-income students. They talked about losing their counselors and their career center, right? Went through all the budget cuts and marched down to City Hall, and they demanded an audience with the mayor, who came out and actually said, you guys did the right thing, and I'm on your side, which only gave them more confidence, and they got their picture in the New York Times, and their parents were really excited about it, and they said, our kids have never been so interested in studying history and, you know, trying to do something about their situation. And you know, to see those kids flooding by me in the hallway that day, it was just like, it was the greatest moment that I've had as an educator, because the kids that started that Facebook page, I had had them last year and went through the entire history of social movements in this country with them, looking at the abolitionist movement and the early women's rights movement. We did, you know, the Seneca Falls Convention role play that Bill Bigelow put together. And so, you know, you hope that one day they'll apply these lessons, you know, in some abstract point in the future, and to see them actually use those organizing methods that we had studied was absolutely breathtaking. But I think the lesson for me in it was that it took two things, right? It took being a social justice educator in the classroom and revealing the hidden curriculum to them, the things that normalize inequality and racism. And it also took going out and organizing a political struggle in the community. And I think that is what we want to challenge our educators to do, who consider themselves social justice educators, to do both of those tasks. And I think the best place to start with organizing in the community for social justice and social movement is social movement unionism, and that's what my chapter in the book is about. The history and theory of teachers' unions and strategies for transforming them into vehicles for social movement unionism, fighting for social justice. And there's a lot of good history here that I don't have time to go into, but I want to look at why we're under attack so much right now today. Are under attack. I mean, they've been under attack for a long time. You remember Bush's Secretary of Education, Rod Page, called the NEA a terrorist organization, right? So I guess compared to that, the rhetoric from the Obama administration is a little more subtle. But in fact, their practice in undermining unions has been much more effective. And you know, so Obama says it's time to start rewarding good teachers and stop making excuses for bad ones. I reject a system that rewards failure and protects a person from its consequences. He doesn't call the teachers union out as a terrorist organization, but implicit amongst his speeches is that it's the teachers unions that are out there protecting bad teachers. That's the role of the union. He doesn't have such system-rejecting statements for bankers and CEOs who have sabotaged the economy and now that he bailed out, right? He rejects a system that protects low-wage teachers, right? Pretty incredible. You know, in a country that spends this much on bombing children in the Middle East, can't seriously think that it's bad teachers that's the wrong with the schools, right? When they underfund, when they spend $100,000 a minute to bomb schools in the Middle East, and we see, you know, our schools being cut, staff, counseling, we know the real causes of this problem. But they're so hell-bent on attacking the unions, I think, because the teachers union is the biggest union in the country, right? It's the most organized workplace. You have 3.2 million people in the NEA and 1.4 million in the AFT. And together it's the single largest block of the labor movement. And so I think the attack on teachers unions in this country is partly about balancing state budgets, right? It's a huge part of the state budget is paying teachers, and so part of it is about balancing state budgets. But I think even on a bigger level, it's about a fundamental transformation of the American economy given the Great Recession, given this new economic era that we're in. I think as the U.S. moves to restructure its economy to be able to compete with the rising power of China, They are moving to a low-wage society. And you can't have an example of somebody with benefits, somebody who gets health care, who has some time off, who has, you know, a little bit of pay. You can't have that example if you're trying to restructure economy to compete with low-wage China. And so I think this attack is about breaking the biggest sector of unionized workers in America to remake the American economy. And I think that's a massive attack. That is an attack that is the 1% is unified around and is going to go all out to rehabilitate their profits. And to stand up to that type of attack, it's going to take a lot of organization, a lot of political clarity, a lot of courage, and a lot of organization inside our unions to retool them, to make them up to the task of defending teachers and also in the process transforming education to be emancipatory instead of to continue the hidden curriculum and to reproduce the inequalities that we have in society. And so I'll just wrap up by saying, you know, our current unions, I think, are in a position of collaboration and partnership. What the whole labor movement has done for the last 30 years since, you know, Reagan destroyed PATCO and sent the message that unions are going to be decimated in this country. Unions have said, we'll sit down at the table with you, we're on the same side, we'll bargain for what little we can. And too often our union representation are so removed from the workplace, or in our case the classroom, that they you know, negotiate away rights that they don't end up having any consequences for facing. And so we want to transform from the partnership model of unionism to a class struggle model of unionism that, you know, our sister here is experiencing, and that we've seen in Tacoma, where the Tacoma teachers went on strike, and then the judge came in and threatened them with a $10,000 fine per teacher if you don't get back in the classroom. And the teachers went to vote, and they voted at a higher percentage. 90% of the teachers said, we're staying out on strike. Find somebody to do what we do, right? We're not going back to work until you lift that fine and give us not cut our pay and keep our seniority. And the judge and the courts had to back down, and that was the power of solidarity, I think, that we have as educators, because they need us, right? To teach the kids, to drive the kids to school, to cook the food in the cafeterias. The thing is, though, we don't need them. What do they do for us, right? We can do all this stuff without billionaires, without politicians that scapegoat us. And so it's about reclaiming the education system through a struggle. And I think we're in a better position than we've ever been with the Occupy movement, raising these issues, with revolutions in Egypt, and with the example of what teachers did in Wisconsin. We've seen methods that work, and it's time to start organizing it and bringing those around the country.
By thanking Bill, because I honestly would not have gotten through this first year of teaching if it weren't for Bill and his wonderful curriculum. So I want to start, you know, I think one central tenet of this book, Education and Capitalism, is that you can't understand educational change without understanding the changes occurring in the capitalist economy. And one chapter in here that I think is particularly relevant for us today in trying to grapple with this is a chapter by Gillian Russum called Obama's Neoliberal Agenda for Public Education. Gillian identifies 5 central features of the neoliberal attack on public education, and I want to go through them and talk about how we've experienced this in Oregon. So the first feature that we're all too familiar with is austerity, right? The idea of shared sacrifice, we need to tighten our belts because of the economic recession. Of course, what is left out of this narrative is that workers have been tightening our belts throughout the neoliberal period. So you have gross domestic product doubling from 1973 to 2007, while the average worker's wage actually declined during that period. So in other words, we didn't get any of the benefits of the economic boom, and now that the 1% has created an economic crisis with their failed economic ideology, they want us to pay for it. So in Oregon, following the national trend, the state slashed corporate taxes and relied on an increasingly regressive income tax. So in the 1970s, corporations in Oregon paid about 18.5% of all income taxes, but by the 2000s, that number had fallen to 4.6%. 40 of the 49 corporate tax loopholes in Oregon were written after 1980. So Oregon now has the 5th lowest corporate taxes of any state in the nation. So because states like Oregon cut taxes on corporations and the wealthy and put the majority of the tax burden on middle working class people, now that those people are being laid off, thrown out of their homes, of course there are these enormous state budget holes, which in our schools means layoffs, higher class sizes, no raises or cost of living adjustments for teachers, an attack on preparation time, districts depending more and more on the hours of unpaid labor that teachers do outside of the school. So nationally, you have 300,000 educator jobs that have been cut since the recession, and school closures have become a regular part of the budget cycle. And as cash-strapped states look to the federal government for help, they aren't getting any, right? Because of the conscious decision to bail out the banks instead of working people. So while the government has lent, committed, or guaranteed $14 trillion to the banks and spent trillions on wars overseas, the stimulus package money that's now running out only included about $140 billion in aid to the states, which is roughly the same size as Wall Street paid out in bonuses in 2009, the year after they were bailed out with our tax dollars. And it should be pointed out that Obama's Race to the Top program only sets aside $4.3 billion for states to compete for, which is less than 1/30th of the amount Wall Street got in bonuses during that 2009 year. And in order to get any funds from Race to the Top, right, states compete by using eligibility requirements that further the agenda of testing and privatization. And this leads us to the second and third feature of the neoliberal attack on education, which are privatizing one of the last major public assets in this country, as Sarah talked about, and intensifying the use of schools as a sorting machine for corporations. So it should come as no surprise to people in this room that in an era when capital is desperate for places to make a profitable investment, many organizations and corporations are hoping to get a piece of the almost $600 billion spent on K-12 education each year. So in Oregon, we saw last year the Democratic governor sign into law HB 2301, which gave about $200 million per budget cycle to online charter schools run by for-profit corporations. Or probably the most recent glaring national example is in Philadelphia, where an unelected body is now pushing through a 5-year plan to close 67 Philadelphia public schools and auction them off to the highest bidder. The goal of the plan is to have 40% of Philadelphia students in charter schools by 2017. And part of this push for charter schools is connected to the idea of using schools as a sorting machine, right? A small layer of youth will be separated out to move into the white-collar knowledge economy and given a liberal arts education, while the rest will be fed a steady diet of test prep. Jillian, I think, talks about this really well in her chapter, so I want to read a quote. She writes, "We are told that restoring competitiveness requires standardized testing, closing failing schools, expanding charters, and making teachers work harder. but plenty of research has documented that such policies are not in fact capable of raising the skills of children overall to make them more competitive. In fact, that isn't really the point. Instead, the neoliberal approach further stratifies the education system to meet the needs of economic and political elites, because they hope to increase the skill levels of a minority of the population while investing as little as possible in the education of everyone else. Education is to be even more divided into distinct tiers and access to it further rationed. Increasingly, business accounting methods, such as test scores, value-added models, etc., are used to identify some layers of the working class that can be funneled into higher education and employment as technical personnel, frontline managers, and professionals. But at a time when unemployment rates are triple those of the 1990s, significant numbers of working class and poor children are relegated to the margins of the economy, where they will be unable to find stable employment. And for many of those who do find jobs, education cannot in fact be the gateway toward a better future because there are just not enough living wage jobs in the economy. Thus, many students are being prepared for jobs where technical or critical skills don't matter, or for prison. The fourth feature of the neoliberal attack on education that Jillian talks about in this chapter is the use of schools as an element of social control, right? And this means a shift from seeing schools as a public good to education as a personal responsibility, right? So for instance, the idea of the achievement gap, right? Improving educational experiences and outcomes for youth of color is no longer a public, a social, or a systemic question of education equity, but rather it's a personal question that is measured by individual students' standardized test scores. Similarly, charter schools' performance pay introduce the neoliberal ideology of competition into public education, as opposed to the expectation that education should be a government-guaranteed right for all. Now lastly, the fifth feature of the neoliberal attack on education is the centralization of power over education systems. So these reforms that they're pushing tend to be hugely unpopular. So in order to implement them, the ruling elite needs to erode any democratic accountability still left in our education systems. So the plan I talked about in Philadelphia was the brainchild of an unelected school reform commission and is being implemented by an appointed chief recovery officer. And in Oregon, the governor recently got rid of the elected school superintendent position and put in its place a CEO, chief education officer. And the unelected Oregon Education Investment Board, which of course is almost all made up of people who have no or very little experience in the field of education, but bring their business expertise to the table. So this is the context, right, in which we have seen an unprecedented attack on Oregon's teachers over the last few months. School boards across the state are determined to take out the budget crisis on the backs of teachers. But the scale of this attack is forcing teachers and students into action, right? So in Oregon, we've seen 3 locals go on strike in the last month or so, and a really successful battle, I think, in Reynolds. And we've seen thousands of students protest against budget cuts, right, with the Upset March. And nationally, right, we've seen San Francisco teachers authorize a strike in the fall by a 97% vote. And Chicago teachers voted down the city's contract offer recently by 80%. And the next day, nearly 6,000 Chicago teachers marched through the downtown loop in Chicago chanting, "Strike, strike, fight, fight." This means that in Obama's home city, home to the second largest national teachers union, where this Education Secretary Arne Duncan made a name for himself by closing 20 public schools per year, and where Obama's former chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, is now the mayor, we will likely see Chicago teachers challenging the entire neoliberal austerity agenda by going on strike in the fall. And I think we really shouldn't underestimate the significance of this. It could change the public debate similarly in the same way that Wisconsin did, that the Occupy movement has, and significantly raise the level of class struggle in the US. And it's no accident, I think, that those who are running the Chicago Teachers Union came out of a rank and file formation like social equality educators. The caucus of rank and file educators that is now leading the Chicago Teachers Union actually started, and I learned this in Rethinking Schools, out as a teacher study group on Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine, which is a critique of neoliberal era capitalism. So I hope this panel and this book can begin a conversation about how we build that kind of organization in our unions and community organizations like Save Our Schools that can not just turn the tide against the attacks on our public schools and teachers unions, but also begin to shake the economic foundations that shape our school system. In the language of the Occupy movement, we have to see the struggle to save our schools as part of the struggle of the 99% against the 1%. And in the language of Dr. Martin Luther King, how can we solve the problem of education without solving the problem of poverty? Right? We need to ask why there are 46 million people living below the poverty line in the richest nation on earth. Quote, and when you begin to ask that question, you are raising questions about the economic system, about a broader distribution of wealth. When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy. And I'm simply saying that more and more we've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society. We are called upon to help the discouraged beggars in life's marketplace. But one day, we must come to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring.